being here today. As Wayne, and Wayne, thank you for the invitation. Before I forget, I need to thank my best research assistant, my husband Bobby, who is a fantastic research assistant on all the things I do. I'm a recovering newspaper reporter, and still absolutely love writing, and my other favorite thing in the world is local history. My goal one day, I hope to retire and write a local history unit or a class to be taught for the schools. That's my dream in the long way future. But today I want to tell you a little bit about when we think we're going to talk about Martin County in the Civil War and a little known part of it, and a little group that's very special to me and some of the other folks in here, some of our family and their contribution to the war. When you think Civil War in Martin County, most people automatically think Fort Branch, and reasonably so. It's still here for one thing, and it had such a large part to do with the Civil War. But before Fort Branch was even built, or in the early stages of it being built, a little action went on in my neck of the woods around farm life, which was not even farm life yet, wasn't even Griffin's Township yet, that we're going to talk about today. And sorry, I keep looking back at my computer. We're looking at 1862. The war had been on in about a year and a half for what we're going to talk about, but let's set the stage. 1860 census for Martin County. 3 organized towns at this point, and all on the river. Of course, that was because it was the main artery for travel, for commerce. Because how did we travel at this point? Foot, horse, or water. And that was it. It would be another 20-some years before the railroad attempt would happen in Diamond City. So this was it for them. And it's another almost 20 years before Griffin's Township is formed out of James. And if there's not a dedicated source that will tell me why Griffin's Township was named Griffin's Township, but by goodness, we got enough Griffins per acre to validate it. So we've not really asked a whole lot of questions. Now, September and October of 1862, I'm sorry, I got to turn the screen a little bit there. Things as far as the Civil War is going on, but here in the county, things were somewhat quiet. Wasn't a whole lot of action going on. Nearly 1,000 men of various ages from the county contributed to the Civil War at some point. And I have that highlighted because we're going to talk about a few of those men in just a few minutes. There were 4 infantry regiments posted between Martin, Beaufort, and Pitt counties. So they were nearby, they were working. And there was an artillery battery on the Rainbow Banks near Hamilton. So there was things going on, but it wasn't a hot spot at that point. And a lot of houses were left without a man of the house. Or not as many men of the house. A man of the house might be a little boy at this point. Which is very scary to think about back in that time. And that's what happened to my own family for part of it. Come November of that year, Zebulon Vance has just become governor the month before. And we're about a year and a half in. He was the commander of the 26th North Carolina. So he had recently been in the war. And this is just a clip out of the for anybody who's done any history digging, you might have found the Tarboro Southerner is one of the greatest archives of Eastern North Carolina history left. It's the earliest newspaper I can find that documents anything in this area. It goes farther back than anything really locally, and on Digital NC you can still find quite a bit of things in there. The Southern ended up becoming the Tarboro Southern. And you can see here where it talks about 1862 was marked with a lot of tension. People were pleading for folks not to be taken into the war so they could stay and get their crops in. As simple as that, they just wanted their folks home to be able to survive. Because their crops were how they survived. And so it was a lot of tension, a lot of heartache, and other things already going on. Now picture it, in my best Sophia voice from the Golden Girls, picture it. You're sitting on the front porch, it's a fall Sunday afternoon. What would most folks probably been doing? Lunch with the family over visiting, or just taking the Lord's afternoon, just sitting around kind of relaxing. You're out in the country We're looking at the area that we now know as Market Street Extension, goes into the thoroughfare and onto Fire Department Road. One just folds into the other. You're just enjoying a quiet, beautiful fall Sunday afternoon. And then you look up and you see this.
Where'd it go? There you go.
5,000 troops coming down the thoroughfare. You hear a ruckus. And you see, and they're the wrong color uniforms. This is what you see coming down the road. And it is confirmed in multiple accounts. You'll see a few that say 10,000, no confirmation of that. But 5,000 troops, led by this man, General John Foster. I cannot imagine sitting on the front porch and hearing this noise and looking at the road and seeing that coming at you. It had to be absolutely terrifying. And we're going to look at some accounts here in just a minute. General Foster was a Union commander in New Bern, and he was the man who led Union forces into Martin County that fall. You hear the term Foster's Raid in the history books, but you hear more of that later on in more the central part of the state. This might be what's called the earlier phase of it. And he was an interesting man, very intelligent man, West Point professor, teacher, but it gets interesting. So the area we're looking at, and this, it's an all modern day map, so we know where we're talking about. 5,000 troops heading up from Washington to Williamston. Of course, they're going to be a little bit to the east of 17, going out through the area we just described. That had to be a tremendous wall of people. I mean, they had to stop somewhere. Think about things like food, just getting back where they had left New Bern earlier that day, all on foot. But they didn't just stop and go straight to Williamston. Now, where we're at here is the thoroughfare where it turns into fire department at the Holland Highway, to get you oriented to where we're at. This is one of the first places we have an account handed down. I preface this with the gentleman's account we're going to discuss. I suspect he may have been handing down the account he was told, because he was a very little boy. We're talking under 3 years old when this happened. I suspect this is more of what he was told that happened or reminded. Yet, with all respect to the account, it was printed and published, so we're going to go with that. Wayne, if this is something folks, sorry about that. I think but Mr. Sylvester Peel, who was the county surveyor here, he lived on what is now Hollow Pond, between what is now Bruce Peel Jr. and Jim Peel's residences. They're around the corner from Lilley. He grew up in the home place there. He talked about them stopping, went into the house, stole dinner right off the stove, went out into the field and ate it. We suspect it's a likelihood they went right out into this open area, this open now. And that's a lot of people, so they didn't just sit on the front porch. Killed the chickens, any animals they could slaughter and eat, they did. They said one goose survived because he hid under the bed. One of the relatives was sickly and was bedbound, so they were not bothered. But just imagine a Sunday afternoon and all of a sudden, your whole life is just wrecked that way. They even stole the knives and forks out of the kitchen. After this was over, they ended up finding metal scraps and going to someone in the community who could wire them together to make makeshift forks and knives. Because everything was gone. I can't even put my mind around it. I've read it and read it and read it. So after they terrorize this part of the neighborhood, they continue on. The next stop is farther down north up Fire Department Road to the John and Linda Griffin farm, which best we can tell is right at Danny's house. He is buried back behind Danny's house. A young girl and her mother from over towards the fairgrounds were coming over across from Beargrass to visit a relative, Betty Biggs, near Smithers Creek Church, and they were crossing kind of north of Smithers Creek. They were trying to hide, because they heard the troops. They were trying to hide around the farm here, but they caught them. They took the horses and everything, they took the little girl's shoes off of her. Now this family had already survived Union troops one time before. But they were trying to hide the horse so they could save at least that one horse. They weren't able to. They were not hurt, but they took everything right from them. Took the little girl's coat off of her, took the shoes off the child. So best we can tell, that's about where that one happened. These are the ones we know about. Even farther up from here, there's another accounts that have been handed down. Farther north at the Jennings and Mary Mitchell home, the original house that was in that area, of more things that happened there. And there's lots of not validated, but unwritten accounts that have been told over the years. They just wreak havoc over the whole area, right here in Farmland. Nobody was spared. So with this going on, we're gonna go closer up to where the action started happening. I'm forgetting why I saw my notes a little bit. What you're looking at here is a sketch that my research assistant also did for me. In his previous life, he was a surveyor, so he knew a little bit about map making. At the top, this is the intersection of what's now Lilley and Kader Lilley Road. And at the bottom of the orangey, you're looking at Million and 17. Because we're looking at kind of bottom of where the action actually happened. You're coming in as this started. And when they turned left on what happened, this is what I'm reading straight out of Foster's account. When they got up there and kind of started veering towards what we now know as 17, he said on the same day, which was November 2nd, we encountered the enemy posted at a strong position at a small creek called Little Creek. And Little Creek, right here, Little Creek is actually a part of Smithers Creek, the smaller tributary of Smithers Creek. Sidebar, you'll find Smithers Creek mislabeled all over this county, but that's another lunch you can learn for another day. But anticipating his Foster's arrival were 6 companies of the North Carolina 26. And this was under the leadership of the barely 20-year-old Colonel Henry Bergman, Northampton County native. And when I say barely 20-year-old, I mean barely 20. Now here's the part you can't make up. Bergman, as a 15-year-old, was accepted to West Point. He excelled from the beginning. But he got there and they said, oh, a little too young, you have to wait a year. So his father said, well, we're gonna get you a tutor to get you ready for this process. The tutor his father hired, John Foster. So they meet again, just a few years later. So the companies remained 4 companies remained in Williamston, and Bergman didn't wait around. He knew he had his hands full. 2 companies were placed at Rawls Mill, which is here out at 17, at the bottom. And then Bergman took out an excursion towards Washington, trying to get a lay of what was happening. But he got, it was decided that every effort must be made for the 15th, and the 59th and the 17th station in Plymouth to avoid being captured. They had to do everything they can to let those folks that were in Plymouth not be captured. They had their hands full enough. So Bergman dispatched warnings to each commander, and he also summons the commander of his other troops to meet him at Little Creek, or meet at Rawls Mill. They reached the creek just as Foster and company began to cross. Now the Union troops were forced to drop many of their blankets and their overcoats as they went down the slope of the bank of the creek. Some of them were crossing in waist-deep water. And it was cold. It had gotten cold. There was snow.
A couple days later.
Later on.
Frozen at night, they woke up with frost on them.
Woke up with frost on them. So the conditions are deteriorating. After an hour-long standoff at Little Creek, Bergman ordered his troops, now totaling 4 companies, to return to Rawls Mill. So this is going on back and forth in this one little stretch, and if you drive this stretch, it doesn't seem that far. But a lot happened in this one little area. According to recorded accounts of the 26, Foster's 3 batteries of artillery against 6 Confederate companies at the Mills. And the skirmish went on for about 1.5 hours. And, sorry, let me make sure I have my numbers right. This was an attempt to, having confirmed the colonels were safe, Burkle made a call to retire for the evening. So this goes on back and forth in this one stretch. It's good nightfall. This was an attempt to avoid disclosing the small number of troops they had. They had to fight like they were much bigger than they were at this point. Union troops ascertained that Burgoyne's men had retreated when they saw the bridge burning, set by the Confederate forces after they had crossed it. Confederates lost 1 soldier, 3 were wounded, and Foster admitting to losing 6 with 8 wounded. And the fighting at Little Creek it began around dusk and ended around 2 a.m. This was the beginning of something even bigger. And it all happened right there in that one curve, pretty much. On the map, and after this is posted, we'll have a copy of the map with it for when to post. You can see closer there was a hospital set up. There's accounts that Mr. Kader Lilley, when he was a child, helped, he and his father discovered a burial site of a couple of soldiers that were not buried with the rest of them. There's stories that go along all, but right in this one street, so much happened. And then when they left, when everyone picked up and left, they finished terrorizing Williamston. They went on to Hamilton, burned and stole everything in sight. Williamston basically shut down by the time they got there, knowing what was coming. But our one little farm life was never to be the same after that. Just one simple afternoon and evening. There's still now even a lot of metal detector fanatics that go out in this very area, go out and detect and have found bullets, buttons, shells, all kinds of things, right in the same area as this battle. But this is the part of the earliest part of the raid you just don't hear about. And it was all right there. And so these are just a list of the participants that you'll see that will be on here. But having someone so close to home, the leader of this was Northampton County, so he wasn't that far from home. Probably felt like it at the time. And the Union had a lot more to work with. They had come up from New Bern. They were probably very tired at that point, but their numbers were larger. So they had more resources. But these guys were home. They were fighting for home, right at home. Some of them were from right in the area. A lot of our local folks were stationed nearby at the time, and we'll look at that in just a second. Any questions at this point?
How long did it take to go from New Bern up to here?
It was pretty much that day.
From Newburgh,
Oh.
he said from Newburgh.
The 31st.
They split up.
Well, I figured you couldn't go over like 20 miles a day, or could you?
They split, I think it was one day, basically a day traveling, they split up out of Newburgh. Actually, half the troops went overland, half the troops by military transport by boat and met again in Washington.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was maybe 2 reasons. One, it could maybe disguise the number of people that were moving, going to converge in Washington. And it may have just been quicker to split them up rather than try to move all those people over land. Because a road was basically a dirt path, back then. So, but yeah, they had split up the day before they arrived. I'm trying to remember if it was the 31st or something like that in Washington.
31st, I believe, is what it's saying.
But yeah, they started out early in the morning. I can't remember, it was 5 or 6 o'clock.
And by the second they were here, right?
Well, they started out that morning. They went all the way from Washington in one day.
Good Lord.
They started out, I can't remember, it was like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. They started early and had marched all the way. When she mentioned about where they stopped and 8, so they had to make that already in half a day's travel. That was around lunchtime.
Was this when Washington got burned, was when they were calling that?
I think it's different, I think it's
This was
different.
different times.
Okay.
I think it's different.
How many troops were with the Confederates? Do we know how many troops on the Confederates?
6 companies, I'm not sure exactly how many, but they were probably outnumbered 8 to 10 to 1.
Okay.
8 or 10 to 1, they were outnumbered, somewhere in that range, because I'm not sure exactly how many people they had in those 6 companies, but on average, they were outnumbered by 8 or 10 to 1.
And we could talk about just this part for all day, because I knew I had it, and having to keep it Baptist and keep it, shorten it up, there's so much more we could talk about with this, but I've included links in the end of this if you want to do some more looking and reading. But I did want to get in one more thing to tell you a little bit about. There's 3 special men that I never met these gentlemen, but I've grown to really, really have a great respect for them, and these are my relatives. The block from the Pine Grove Road over up to 171, in that block was basically Henry Robertson, or at some point, some variation of the Robertsons. And that's my crowd, Danny's crowd, and this was one of the Henrys you'll find in genealogy. They repeated names a lot. We got about 74 Henrys and 34 Harmons. But these were 3 of Henry's sons. And I've written quite a bit about 2 of them, and I'm starting to learn more about the 3rd one. Alfred, by the Civil War, well, let me start with James Benjamin in the middle there. This is, for those of you who knew me, this was my granddaddy Oscar's grandfather. Danny's great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, Danny's great-grandfather. He signed up early in the Civil War. He lived there on what's now the Nathan Robertson Road at the home place. He signed up, he was with the 61st Hill Guards, who were stationed nearby during this, but they were close by, but not a part of what we were just discussing.
They were some of the ones that escaped.
Yes.
Where Bergman held and allowed them to escape.
Bergman's job was to hold it to let some of them to escape and get clear, and he was part of that group. He would go on to be captured. He had quite a remarkable story. He was captured at Fort Harrison in Virginia late in the war, survived Point Lookout, Maryland prison camp, which Bobby and I visited several years ago. And just to take a look at what he survived, the recreation of it was just gut-wrenching. But he made it back. Almost nothing, barely clothed. Took a train back home and settled back on the Robertson Road. And from everything I have read and seen, became one of Martin County's most productive citizens, was involved in everything in the community, gave back, and was just a tremendous part of the community. But he survived the prison camp. He came out as a sergeant, I believe, and I've put an attachment to his obituary. I'm fascinated by reading the obituaries of this time. They're incredible to read, and it talks a lot about his service and things. Harmon Thomas Robertson. This is where I debated on whether or not admitting that I'm related to Lena Faye over there, but I thought I'd go ahead and come to grips with it. But this is her great,
Well,
multiple great.
he is my great-great-grandfather on my daddy's side of the family, but my great-grandfather on my mama's side, so I'm my own cousin.
That's a whole other bunch of money. That's a whole other bunch of money.
Some of that was Sarah.
And he was, I'm sorry, I have my notes right here. He was he enlisted early in the war in Company A under Captain William Biggs, who was a name known to Martin County history, and then consigned to the 17th Regiment of Hope's Division. Served at the Rainbow Banks, Plymouth, likely around this same time, and survived Petersburg. So that's 2 that survived that were probably shouldn't have. Total God thing. Well, the 3rd one was not so fortunate. This was the older son, Alfred. This was Alfred's 2nd time being a soldier. He had already served in the Mexican War, And for those of you familiar with Martin County District, the name John Getzinger might come to mind. He served with Mr. Getzinger in Mexico. He was a young man then. He was not a young man in the Civil War. My suspect is that when he signed on later in the Civil War, he'd already done this. He was sending his younger brothers who might be more helpful, and he was staying home to keep the farm running, is my theory. But he eventually signed up. He was with, I always get this wrong, the 40th, or the 3rd Artillery Company of the 40th Regiment. He was at Fort Anderson. In February of 1865, when the Tacony, a Union gunboat, was offshore and shelled the fort, and he was killed in his barracks. We have actually been down to the fort where that happened. He was never brought home, because of course at that time that wasn't highly likely anyway. But if you ride by Robertson Cemetery on 171, his wife's stone, that's the picture of it right there, Prudence Robertson, his information's on the back of that stone. And when I was a little kid, I was always fascinated by why his information was on the very back. But once I got to reading and learning, I totally understood why it was. So he never came back. But he survived the Mexican War to come home, help get the farm back up and going, let the other brothers go and serve. Went and served himself, but he didn't make it back home this time. So I am extremely proud of these brothers. I feel like they're a big part of our family's history. And whether or not I agree with what the war was about, I'm very proud to have family that was willing to serve. Because that's what it was really all about. And so that's just a little introduction to my part of my family's service. That was just one family though. There was a lot of these families. A whole lot of these Robertson families by other names that had multiple family members. And a lot of them didn't come back. And things like between the raid and people not coming back, it changed our county forever. And one thing I love about sharing these stories is we can't ever forget that. Because if we ever forget, we can't forget this part. Because when we forget this part, we forget where we've come from. So, again, we'll have it linked. I've got links. These are 3 stories I had written previously on today's topic, and there's some other links with other research I had done that didn't quite have time to get to today. So, any questions?
Do you know what Luenda's name was before she married?
I guarantee I have.
Was she a Lilley or a Manning or a Coltrane?
Well, you just went through the phone.
There's 3 Luendas.
At least, and I've got it written down. I can find it and I'll get it to you. Because I've got a couple in there and I can't remember which one it was.
Wasn't General Foster involved with a major battle in Piedmont? Earlier or later, seemed like I read where the Martin County campaign has not gotten the notoriety of another campaign he was in.
Now, there was one I know around Goldsboro area
Maybe
that's much more noted. I could have missed something though.
Yeah.
Do you know any in the Piedmont?
I'm not that it means anything, I'm just not aware of it. I know he spent a lot of time, basically, in the eastern part of the state, but yeah, Goldsboro, certainly, yeah.
The Goldsboro is where I'm aware of his name became known.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Goldsboro to Kinston and all that.
Well, that's what I had. I have no idea how I did on time, but thank you all for the opportunity. And if you have any questions, I'll be around for a few minutes.
Just keep on talking.
No. Loretta, no one wants that. All right, thanks again, Wayne.